breaking news. Florida facing a double threat right now, right in the middle of this deadly pandemic. A hurricane is moving in. As we come on the air, Hurricane Isaias is edging toward the coast, strengthening overnight, in fact, packing winds of 85 miles an hour.
The Category 1 storm battering the Bahamas all through the night, lashing the islands with powerful winds that toppled trees and ripped apart roofs, as well as pounding rain that flooded roads.
Isaias has already caused widespread flooding and small landslides in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, where at least 2 people were killed. Our Rob Marciano is in Miami with the very latest on the storm track. Rob, good morning to you.
Good morning. Hard to believe just 1 week ago today, last Saturday, we were bracing for Hurricane Hannah on another red zone coronavirus hotspot on the coast of Texas. And now we've got a storm that has strength nearly the size and strength of Hannah, which has already ripped through Puerto Rico and other islands that are still recovering from recent hurricanes.
Overnight, Hurricane Isaias slamming the Caribbean and moving toward the east coast of the U.S. The hurricane battering the Bahamas, packing powerful winds over 80 miles per hour, heavy rain, and dangerous storm surge. The storm also hitting the Turks and Caicos. And in Puerto Rico, Isaias damaging homes and knocking out power for thousands, leaving neighborhoods across the island underwater, flash floods and mudslides through the streets. The National Guard saving children, including this newborn caught in the floodwaters in Mayagüez. In the Dominican Republic, the storm turning deadly, killing 2, including a 5-year-old boy. The hurricane gaining strength, now taking aim at the epicenter for coronavirus cases, Florida.
They just signed an executive order to declare a state of emergency in every coastal county up Florida's east coast.
Florida residents racing to prepare by stocking up and boarding up. Americans up and down the East Coast preparing for Isaias in the midst of a global pandemic. North Carolina declaring a state of emergency, prompting evacuations. But most shelters remaining closed due to the virus. The coming storm also forcing coronavirus testing sites in the storm's path to close down.
Our sites, because they're outdoors with tents, if it were to get 40, 50 mile an hour winds, it would just collapse.
I suppose if there's any sort of good news is that because of the pandemic, there are a lot fewer people that would normally be here. Not many tourists on South Beach the last few days, last few months, as a matter of fact. All right, let's talk about where the center of this thing is, about 200 miles to our south and east and heading in this direction. So we're starting to feel the effects of it later on this afternoon. It's south of Nassau in the Bahamas by about 80 miles. A Category 1 storm forecast to stay that way as it approaches the south.
Breaking right now, Isaias becoming a hurricane overnight and now churning towards Florida. It's already caused widespread problems in Puerto Rico. Not just massive flooding, but 400,000 customers are without power. Now, that is about 27% of the population. The National Guard springing into action, rescuing families from the flood zones. One man seen carrying an infant to safety. Elsewhere, another rescuer wades through deep water as a boy clings to him. The water is so forceful they even swept away a vehicle. The problem so pervasive, about 15% of cell towers are now without service. 23 hospitals are now operating.
We begin with this, though. Coronavirus, of course, 2 states already dealing with a rapid rise in coronavirus. Cases are also facing severe storms this morning. Right now, Hurricane Douglas is churning just off Hawaii, creating potentially dangerous conditions. Now, that state rarely gets hit by hurricanes. Only 2 have made landfall since 1959.
But we begin in South Texas, which could be looking at heavy rain and flash flooding today from the remnants of Hurricane Hannah. That storm made landfall on Saturday to devastating effect. Janet Shanlian is in Corpus Christi, Texas. Janet, this area is already under enormous strain because of the pandemic. What's the biggest concern there?
Anthony, good morning. The issue right now is high water, which is still swamping communities like the one that I'm in here. And this is a double whammy for the region, as you noted. Not only are first responders having to manage the cleanup right now, they're dealing with surging cases of the coronavirus.
90-mile-an-hour winds whipped across South Texas over the weekend as Hurricane Hannah slammed into the coast. Strong gusts blew this semi off the road. Its driver appeared shaken, but safe. Homes and businesses were submerged. FEMA approved an emergency declaration for federal aid. A tourist hotspot in Corpus Christi, the Bob Hall Pier was ripped apart despite surviving Hurricane Harvey almost 3 years ago.
To see the pier damaged like that was pretty heartbreaking.
Joe McComb is Corpus Christi's mayor.
A hurricane, it hit yesterday, we're out here today. COVID hit back in February or March, and we're still dealing with it. That's really the frustrating thing.
Some of the heaviest rain fell near the border in Hidalgo County, where coronavirus hospitalizations have more than doubled this month. Area business owners say Hanna is yet another challenge in an already difficult year.
I came here for spring break, knowing that this is a tourist attraction area. Then the COVID hit. So I was like, wow, that just messed out all the money that I was supposed to get in March.
What's it like to have COVID and now a hurricane?
Man, it makes you really start questioning a lot of things, but I have a lot of faith in God.
While flooding is still plaguing China's longest river, a new round of flooding is emerging upstream, the biggest yet this year. Downstream, a major river's water levee has climbed above its warning lines, but several restaurants are found inside its embankment, and they're still open. NTD's Juliet Song has more.
In southern China, a major river's water level has hit a historic high, but several luxury restaurants were found inside the river embankment, even though they weren't supposed to be there. On top of that, they were still open while authorities raised the flood alert to its highest level. The restaurants have been there for 6 years. Even though it's not legally approved, the company that built the embankment opened up space inside and rented units out to business owners. As a result, authorities tore down the restaurants overnight. While massive flooding is still plaguing regions surrounding the Yangtze River, the country's longest river, a new wave of floodwater has emerged upstream, and it's the biggest yet this year. Regions upstream are already suffering. In parts of Sichuan province, torrential rain is triggering landslides. Roads have been damaged, signals are cut off, and the power went out for some areas. A video circulating online shows a man braving the flood while trying to save his cattle. Moments later, the strong current washed away a young calf as an older animal appeared to chase after it. In the end, all of them were washed away and the man came back empty-handed. Moving further downstream to a city hit particularly hard by the flooding. Videos posted online showed massive floodwater as it washed away multiple cars. And a narrow escape. A person trapped inside a flooded building was seen reaching out his hands for help. That's as the water had nearly filled the first floor. Before long, the entire first floor was submerged, but the voice in the video said the person managed to escape. A large part of the city's downtown area is already underwater. Further downstream, floodwaters are almost as high as the tops of school buildings. Besides the waves of flooding, other natural disasters are also striking the country. Areas upstream from the Three Gorges Dam recently reported a magnitude 3.0.
What? The New South Wales coast is being battered again for the second time in as many weeks. Heavy rain, gusty winds and a huge surf is on the forecast. For the latest, reporters Madeline Lewis is in Newcastle and Mary Louise Vince is in Wombrel on the Central Coast. Maddie, let's talk to you first. We saw wild conditions last night around where you are and even some rescues. What's been going on?
Yeah, that's right, Nate. Look, there were several rescues. The SES were called to over 150 jobs, and one of the biggest ones was a bus that actually drove into floodwater. The driver apparently didn't see the water until the bus was in it. The water was up to the bus's windows, and fire and rescue crews were nearby assisting 3 people stuck on the roof of a car when they got rediverted to help the SES, who had to rescue 10 people, 10 passengers from this bus, including a child. We're being told that they used a small boat called the Archangel to get those people off the bus. Obviously a very scary experience for them. Now, there was also extreme flooding in a suburb called Mayfield. There was water everywhere around the streets. Drivers had to be incredibly careful. Over in Lambton, there were 5 people rescued from 2 homes after a metre of water inundated those homes. We're also hearing about people stranded near their cars at Hunter Stadium, at least 15 there that were calling for help. So a series of flood rescues, at least 10 that the SES were called to around the Hunter after more than 150 millimetres of rain.
Wow, these East Coast lows are notorious. What are we expecting today for that region?
Yeah, look, the rain isn't as heavy as we saw yesterday, but there's still showers, as you can see around me. It's quite windy. I'm at Nobby's Beach in Newcastle, where it's low tide, but the waves are still quite messy, and we are expecting really dangerous surf and much bigger waves, up to 5 metres. We're expecting that kind of weather to go into tomorrow. It will calm down around Wednesday and Thursday, though. In the meantime, everyone's being urged to stay safe and not drive through any floodwater.
And if we're talking about big seas, well, we need to go to Wombrel for sure. Mary Louise, how are people feeling there after all that coastal erosion last week? Is there anyone even left?
There is actually one person, Nate. I'm standing here on the balcony of a resident here in Wombrel. She's one of the only few that's allowed to be here on this stretch where the homes are their stability's really being compromised. And standing on the balcony, looking at the beach, you can probably hear it. It's low tide now, but the weather is starting to come in, and you can see that the waves are really starting to come into the shore. The owner of the house here has been videoing the seas over the weekend. As you may have heard, emergency stabilisation works have been carried out here around the clock for about 5 days. They've been brought 900 tonnes of rocks to this region to be put in front of this house, as well as about 18 other homes along this stretch of Wombrel Beach, right on the escarpment along the shoreline to shore it up ahead of this weather that is starting to hit us now. And as I say, at low tide, you can see that the waves are already starting to lap at those rocks, and need I say, some of those rocks are already starting to be displaced.
900 tonnes, it sounds like a lot, but it's really just a tiny little bit against all that power of the ocean. Any idea how big the waves are?
Kohinoor Begum is desperate to save whatever few possessions she's left with. Before the flooding, she used to live with her family of 6 in this modest hut. Now she's not sure where her family and livestock will find shelter.
We're facing many problems. There's no work here. The authorities were supposed to distribute relief here, but we have yet to receive any. We're not even sure what to feed our livestock under these conditions. We may have to take shelter by a bridge nearby for now.
Bangladesh lies in Asia's largest river delta system. Many big rivers which originate in the Himalayas flow through India into the Bay of Bengal, making the country highly vulnerable to annual flooding. Following the recent torrential rain, many areas on the outskirts of the Dhaka are also underwater, such as here in Sabar. But the Flood Forecasting Center says there is no chance of the floodwaters moving farther inland towards Dhaka for now. UNICEF says more than 2 million people, including around 1 million children, have been impacted, and 500,000 families displaced due to floods. Donjoy Rai lost his home in Kurigram, northern Bangladesh. He's now living with his family in a temporary shelter.
Many people came and visited the area, even local government people, but so far we have not received any assistance. It's been almost 2 months since this area flooded.
Health officials say thousands of people in the flood-affected areas have fallen victim to waterborne diseases. The government says it's prepared to deal with the situation.
The Prime Minister has instructed us to take a long-term strategy to deal with the flood situation. We're prepared and have adequate relief materials, cash and food, including special provisions for children, dry foods and even hot-cooked meals. We had a cabinet meeting and decided where to distribute everything.
But despite the assurances, the government has yet to assess the full impact of the flooding. It's a challenging time for people like Kohinoor, who amid a raging coronavirus pandemic now also face the struggle to rebuild their lives. Tanvi Chaudhry, Al Jazeera, Sabar, Bangladesh.
You might have heard or seen severe thunderstorms that moved through parts of western Massachusetts late last night. 22 News Storm Team meteorologist Adam Stremko was working for you with a look at some of that damage, Adam.
Well, Ciara, those storms developed pretty quickly and packed quite a punch.
For the third time in the last 2 weeks, severe thunderstorms moved through western Massachusetts. Once again, it was Hampshire County that was hit the hardest. Damaging winds brought down trees and power lines in South Hadley and Granby.
It was heavy rain, and it seemed like there was hail, and then there's a lot of tree damage down. Even behind my house, there's tree damage.
And those severe storms knocked down trees here on South Street. You can see some of the large trees that were snapped and uprooted. The Granby Highway Department spent Thursday morning cleaning up the damage.
Most of the locations had multiple trees. Morgan Street's probably the worst. We had 2 big trees come down, several poles broken, wires down. We've been out all night trying to open up the roads.
Morgan Street was closed while crews worked to clean up the damage and restore power. Some trees and branches also came down on New Ludlow.
About 90 homes remain without power on the New South Wales south coast. More than 15,000 properties were blacked out when a severe storm system moved through the region. Emergency services have responded to over 2,000 calls for help since Saturday, many from drivers trapped in floodwaters. The state's SES Commissioner is encouraging all motorists to check for traffic updates as many roads remain closed due to flooding.
4:29 this morning. Now, in the San Fernando Valley, where the epicenter is located, that quake was felt as a very sharp jolt. People also felt it as far as La Crescenta, downtown LA, over to LAX, the Miracle Mile area, Hollywood, and Pasadena. So far, there have been no immediate reports, thank goodness, of any damage or injuries.
And this video that you're looking at here, this is video of the shaking right in our studio here in Glendale. You can see Brandy and I, those heavy lights and equipment above us were just swaying right above our heads, and we just gripped that desk. We were ready to jump under it, but it stopped, and we didn't have to after about 5 to 6 seconds there.
Thank goodness it was just a 4.2 and not something more serious right now. We're also getting new video, new pictures coming in from some of our colleagues. Some of you are viewers. This is from ABC News Radio, Jason Nathanson. He's in the North Hollywood area. You probably heard his reports for network radio. Oh, that looks like wine that might have cracked, or coffee maybe in a cup. Maybe wine from the night before. We'll have to talk to Jason about that, depending on the coloring on your screen. But you can see some smashed frames, some damage. That is the extent of all we're hearing, though, right now. Some other people reporting that things fell, but no significant damage.
Yeah, very good. So let's go back out to John Gregory. He's live in Pacoima, where the quake is the talk of the town this morning. John.
Yeah, Leslie, we moved to the Hanson Dam Recreation Area. A lot of people come up here to exercise. You can see them walking the dam. And we've been talking to people all morning long. Everybody felt this earthquake. Everybody describes it as a pretty big jolt. Some people say it shook them from their sleep. Some reported minor damage. Like you said, nothing serious, just some things falling off shelves. Earlier this morning, we were at a 7-Eleven, a donut shop. We didn't see any significant damage, which was kind of surprising to us because we felt this earthquake too. We were in Lakeview Terrace around 4:29 this morning when it hit, and it felt like a pretty good shake, the kind of shake that would cause some damage. So we've been surprised. We haven't seen any serious problems. Everybody just saying, you know, it's part of living in California, and we agree. You know, you kind of get used to it, but at the same time, when you feel it, it's a bit unsettling to have the earth moving under your feet like that. So everybody absorbing it. It certainly was an easy way to wake up this morning. Nobody needed their coffee. Meanwhile, let's get an update from Scott Reif. He's live in Air 7 HD. Scott.
Yeah, John, good morning. You know, we're right overhead. We're looking at the Hansen Dam, and this should be right about where the epicenter was this morning at 4:29. And as we look out over the city of Pacoima, I'll bring up Sky Map 7, you see Whiteman Airport, you see the 170 and the 5. This is the area basically that probably got hit the hardest. So if you live in this area, you certainly got jolted. Now, we got airborne right after the quake. We were up. We did not see a lot of emergency equipment, which is a really good sign because after an earthquake like that, they get a lot of emergency calls, people that are hurt possibly, and we just did not see anything like that. So even though it was a jolt, it reminded everybody, like you said, that we live in earthquake country. It appears for now, from what we've seen from the helicopter, that the damage is going to be minimal, and we don't know and have not heard about anyone that has been injured. So really good news, but a lot of...
There is new concern about the safety of a group of killer whales in the Pacific Northwest. The Navy plans to conduct tests in the region, and animal advocates warn these endangered orcas could be harmed. CBS News meteorologist and climate specialist Jeff Baradelli reports.
It makes me feel heartbroken hearing or seeing a whale be harmed.
10-year-old Ella Grace, better known as Ella Saves the Ocean to her thousands of social media followers, is on a mission to save the whales.
Whales aren't these mindless animals that have no clue what they're doing. They are highly intelligent. They live in a pod with their family for their entire life. They hunt together, they work together, and to hear that whales being harmed, it's upsetting.
The reason why Ella is worried is because the U.S. Navy recently requested an authorization from NOAA Fisheries, asking for 51 takes per year of orcas in the Pacific Northwest. Now, in this context, the meaning of take or incidental take is to unintentionally disturb, harass, or harm a marine mammal. These authorizations are required under the Marine Mammal Protection Act for activities that produce disruptive underwater sound, like energy exploration, construction, and even scientific research.
They're not saying that they're going to purposely kill 51 whales, but they are saying that their activities may harm 51 times or 51 individuals.
For Dr. Deborah Giles, the loss of even one orca is devastating. For the past decade, her passion at the University of Washington involves tracking one very small but very special community of killer whales called the Southern Residents. When they were listed as endangered in 2005, there were 88. But recently, their numbers have declined to 72.
Every threat that is facing them has been caused by us.
The recent drop in population can be blamed on a number of things, including a decline in their primary food source, Chinook salmon. That's partly due to overfishing, but we're also seeing a buildup of harmful toxins in the water, an increase in ship traffic, and warming waters due to climate change.
Essentially, all of this population is in a state of hunger. And even still, they still cooperatively hunt and share food. Literally sharing one salmon, taking a bite and passing what's left to a family member.
Orcas share a compassionate and cultural bond with each other, a connection which in many ways mimics our own human relationships. In fact, their lifespans even mirror that of humans, some living to 90 years old.
They're just an incredibly easy population of animals to fall in love with.
The Southern Residents are some of the most well-studied animals on the planet, spending most of their time in the Pacific Northwest, traveling as far south as Monterey, California, and as far north as Southeast Alaska. But the Navy inevitably crosses paths with these orcas from time to time during training and testing activities. And since the whales use sound waves to navigate, communicate, and hunt, it makes them particularly sensitive to Navy acoustics, from sonar to sonic booms.
Sound carries better in water than it does in the air, and very loud explosions, like 1,000-pound explosions, can have the impact, a physical impact on the body of a killer whale.
This video from 2003 was captured by the Center for Whale Research in the Salish Sea near Seattle. Using a hydrophone underwater and a video camera up above, they simultaneously caught the screeching Navy sonar down below and the disturbed and erratic behavior of the southern residents at the surface. Dr. Giles says intense underwater sound like this can compromise the orca's ability to forage or communicate with one another, a foundation for their family's survival. So, Giles' organization, Wild Orca, along with 28 others, including the Seattle Aquarium, wrote a letter to NOAA Fisheries expressing their concern. The controversy revolves around a term which NOAA uses called negligible impact.
Nurses in this hospital in Johannesburg are struggling to keep up with the intake of COVID-19 patients. Back in April, the isolation room filled up so quickly that those infected had to be put in ordinary wards. On these images, only a curtain separates them from other patients.
In our facilities, in our hospitals, COVID-19 cases are all over the place. There's no ward, by the way, that doesn't have a COVID-19 patient. The nurses are testing positive as well, and it's a mess.
Nurses say that 240 members of staff have caught COVID-19. Like many across the country, they've complained of a shortage of protective gear to tend to patients. This as the country has been rocked by allegations of corruption to fight the outbreak. Cases have risen over recent weeks after lockdown measures were lifted before the virus had peaked to avoid further damage to an already shrinking economy. Now past the 500,000 mark, the number of deaths remains lower than the global average, with 8,100 recorded fatalities. But despite widespread testing, social stigma remains a barrier to stopping the spread of COVID-19.
I've heard people saying, I'll never test for corona because I know how I would be treated. Some, they even say from my family. Some, they would say it's obvious in the community.
Now the world's fifth most affected country, the World Health Organization has warned that South Africa may be a precursor for other outbreaks across the continent.
Immediately upon arrival from Turkey, the 27 passengers on this flight were directed to this room for a COVID-19 test.
Je viens d'apprendre que la Turquie était classée comme pays à risque, alors que je sors de là-bas, je peux vous assurer que du produit désinfectant, il y en a partout, des masques, tous les gens en ont, et ils en ont à foison partout où vous allez, on vous les offre, etc. Alors qu'en France, on est encore très loin d'agir de cette façon.
On va vous proposer un test.
C'est obligatoire.
Oui, c'est obligatoire et c'est mieux pour vous.
The only way out of the test, a sworn statement no more than 3 days old, proving that the passenger does not have the virus. On this flight from Istanbul, 15 passengers provided the document, with the rest forced to submit to the test.
On va y aller. Voilà, c'est terminé.
Avec tous les risques en ce moment et avec tous les problèmes qu'il y a, je pense que c'est une très bonne chose. Moi, je suis pour.
Merci, madame. Au revoir.
The passenger will have to remain in isolation for 24 hours while she awaits the results. If it's positive, she'll have to quarantine for 14 days. And as for those who refuse to take the test,
je signe un arrêté préfectoral, donc qui l'oblige à se confiner. Je ne peux pas l'obliger à passer le test, c'est un acte médical. Par contre, je peux l'obliger à se confiner chez lui. Et sur la base de cet arrêté, il y aura des contrôles et des sanctions derrière s'il ne respecte pas.
The next wave of medical inspections in Nice is set for Sunday for passengers arriving from Serbia, also considered an at-risk country.
Dubbed a Day of Freedom, thousands gathered in Berlin to denounce anti-virus restrictions imposed by the government. With few masks in sight, a dense crowd of around 15,000 people marched to the Brandenburg Gate. Many attending say the government is violating their rights.
Unsere Forderung ist zurück zur Demokratie, weg mit den Gesetzen, die uns einengen, weg mit der Maske, die uns zu Sklaven macht.
In addition to ordinary people upset over what they see as government overreach, The crowd contained a mix from the far right, as well as conspiracy theorists who believe the coronavirus pandemic is a hoax.
Und das ist eine reine Panikmache. Also ich sehe da überhaupt keine Gefahr. Ich kenne keine Kranken mehr. Ich habe im März viele Kranke gekannt, Skifahrer, andere Urlauber. Da ging wirklich was rum im Februar. Aber jetzt gibt es keine Kranken mehr.
Und das ist schwiegen. Also Menschen, die nicht recherchieren, wie wir das machen, die werden dumm gehalten und glauben das, was die Regierung uns vorgibt und begeben sich in die Angst, die die Regierung mit uns veranstaltet. Und Angst senkt das Immunsystem.
Berlin's police force says it's launched legal action against the protest organizers for failing to respect social distancing and hygiene regulations. A smaller group calling themselves Grandmothers Against the Extreme Right held a counter-demonstration. The rally comes as the government warns against an uptick in new infections. Despite an easing of lockdown measures, social distancing rules remain in effect, as does a requirement to wear masks in shops and on public transport.